Hi, everybody, and welcome back to It's a New Year, and this is our first live stream of 2024. I have to get familiar to say it, 2024. And we've got our special guest. I can see her in the background. Dani's in the background. I can see her there. I'll let her get herself ready, and we'll bring her on. We're going to have a great conversation with you very shortly. So just for laughs, just to start the year, we're putting this out on the anti-free speech platforms of YouTube and Facebook, as well as Twitter, Getter, Rumble, blah, 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 all the other stuff, right? So I see you guys joining over on YouTube because that kind of flows in. Hi, Laura and Leslie and all of you folks. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks for being here with us. Hey, listen, so we've got a lot of stuff to get through, as we always do, and we've got a lot of stuff lined up for you guys as well. But before we do that, we're gonna, as always, have a word from our sponsors, Quantum Hypno, with a brand new ad from Sarah Jane. So play the ad.
Quantum Hypno is a transformative approach that connects with the superconscious through the power of hypnosis. I take the time to get to know you and create a relaxed setting where you can share your life story. There's no rush or time pressure involved. During the hypnosis session, you'll experience a natural and profound connection with the superconscious, accessing healing, wisdom, and the answers that you've been seeking throughout your life. Envision the ability to travel through time and space, recovering lost knowledge and exploring the universe. This life-changing work has already helped thousands of people dealing with addictions, trauma, or a sense of being lost, enabling them to move forward in the right direction. I've worked with people from all walks of life, so what are you waiting for?
There you go, Quantum Hypno. Give it a click and support Sarah Jane. As I told you throughout 2023, those of us who operate in the alternative media, we don't have the huge funders that the mainstream media have, such as the BBC. So we rely on you, on what you folks give us, what the likes of Sarah can give us as well. That's how we operate. And we also have, by the way, just a wee plug to Just Stop T-shirts, who a little startup UK company who do some pretty fun T-shirts. I even modeled one for you. So just trying to support everybody as we get ourselves organized for 2024. Right. We're coming to the main event. So one of the things that I think one of the most important things we have is language. It's how we communicate with each other. It's how it's essentially lies at it's our raison d'etre in so many ways. But how do we use words? What do they mean? How can they be used to control us? All kinds of stuff like that there. These are all the big questions. And now we're going to have all the answers. Talk about a build-up I'm giving her. So, folks, I want you to welcome a lady called Dani Katz. Dani, welcome.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Well, as I said, I wanted to build you up. So you're going to solve all the issues that we might have regarding language. And by the way, you can find Dani. There's Dani's Twitter as well. And Dani's got a book out we're going to talk about a bit later as well. But Dani, language, I mean, it is so fundamentally important, isn't it? And yet, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel, certainly over the past couple of years, certainly since 2020 anyway, language has been so weaponized in so many ways. Do you the whole the safe effect of all this the manipulation of words and the power that it has, it amazes me. Well, what's your thoughts on that, Dani?
It's really everything. So the subconscious mind is responsible for 95% of our experience of reality, and it is programmed primarily through language. As well, we have that biblical portion in Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So whether we buy into religion or not, it's valuable insight into how language functions as reality creation technology, as well as the primary means of programming people as individuals, as well as the collective. So the social engineers, they know this, and they utilize this to push their agendas forward. My work in the world is to share this knowledge with the rest of us. And it's interesting because, I, as an alternative content creator, I'm sure you also know well how intense the censorship situation is. And I'm one of the most censored content creators I know. And I think it's because I'm sharing empowerment tools. I'm sharing clues as to how we can actually course correct our Earthship. And I think that's really threatening to the powers that were.
Yeah, because I did see, Dani, I think you had a bit of a dispute with our friends at YouTube. Recently, I saw a tweet of yours, chat. I mean, I don't, to be quite honest with you, most of the shows I do, I don't even bother with YouTube. I despise YouTube because they are so censorious of people like us. But there again, it's big market and all that there. But when you get ideas out that challenge, and this is maybe the point of this really, you're putting out ideas out there that challenge the narrative in so many ways, and so they will push back at you. They absolutely will. They'll, the algorithm is going to get you, so to speak.
Sometimes I wonder if it's the algorithm or if they have someone on my account, because I don't talk about the COVID narrative. I don't talk about the election. Like, I don't talk about their hot button issues. I teach people about propaganda, and I also teach people how to empower themselves with language. And I have restrictions on my account right now that I don't know anyone else who has those restrictions. And I think, and to top it off with the big tech censorship is the fact that we now have the weaponization of customer service. So you can't talk to a human on any of these platforms. And we've all signed on to this. Like, it's also normalized now that these predatory corporations can silence us and there's nothing we can do, allegedly.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it makes it very difficult. Although I do think, Dani, that's where having alternative platforms, even like, as I say, I mean, this is going out on multiple ones, because I just decided quite a while back that just for me to bank on, say, YouTube and Facebook was folly, because I have challenged all the hot button issues, and we've had guests on that have challenged those, and it's amazing, and it just instantly it has to be. I think for me, it's algorithmically driven, but that's the same on Twitter/X as well. I'm conscious that, again, this is where we get into words, that it's specific words seem to just, they're like landmines, you put them down and whoop, up it goes. Do you find that as well?
I do find that, and it's like this weird learning curve that those of us who are speaking truths have to figure out, as far as like what words are going to trigger them. Yep. I realize, like, anytime I mention propaganda, those posts are going to get suppressed, or going to get shadow banned. And so, yeah, I mean, there's something to learning how to dance around them. God bless Odyssey, Rumble, Locals, like all the free speech friendly platforms. I think what's also frustrating is the gaslighting around it, given that the majority of people don't think there's a censorship problem. They don't, like, it doesn't compute. So I think that's been another level of frustration, is the gaslighting around censorship and people alleging that it doesn't exist, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, it's so true that there, and in a way, I've started to learn like a parallel language, a parallel actually code in so many ways, because if you say the specific, words, then that causes all kinds of suppression, throttling of your account, and all that stuff goes on. So you kind of learn, and part of me resents that, because I do like to be able to speak directly, but I've realized that, but you can't, if you, or certainly it makes life very difficult if you try to speak directly, because those words will trigger censorship in whichever format it comes, Dani, and so you have to think, so how can I use words and everyone can understand what I'm saying, but they're not necessarily my first choice of words. I mean, it's tricky enough, isn't it?
It's tricky. And it also, I mean, it kind of parallels what I teach with my quantum languaging work, right? Because we go to speak in our sort of like habitual pattern ways. But now as content creators, we've been trained to like pause, take a little bit of witness consciousness, because it's like, oh, if I say this word, then I'm going to get a strike, right?
Yeah.
So I employ something similarly by choice and in terms of empowering myself as I clue in to deleterious or sabotaging coding in my regular everyday language. So I'm not doing it because of censorship, but I'm catching myself before I program my own reality with anything negative or disempowering. So I'm kind of in that practice anyway.
Yeah.
But like you, I'm frustrated that we have to play the game in terms of censorship.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, earlier today I appeared on another channel for sort of a 10-minute sort of radio TV thing, and I was so conscious, Dani, that even more so because that was more mainstream. There's that like microsecond, isn't there? There's that microsecond that you're going so fast, and you're just the editing is going on, like it's going on in real time. People don't know it. People don't even pick up, I guess. But we, the people that do it, we know what we're doing, don't we?
Yes, we do. And it's I mean, I'm not a fan of the us them, right? And the engineered binary that is doing humanity such a disservice. And at the same time, people like you and me are living in a completely different world. And we're learning new tools to deal with this world that the majority has no clue about.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, Dani, I know you've brought out a book. I want to just bring up Dani's book here. Great. I love I love the title, actually. The Language of Betterarchy, a blueprint for uniting against tyranny. So, okay, there you go. Available. It's actually, you can find it over on my website. We've stuck it up a link for Dani's book over there, and you can get it on I think that's Amazon as well, isn't it? So, Dani, betterarchy. That now there's a word to conjure with. Explain what we mean by betterarchy.
Yes. So, the concept of betterarchy came about. I started researching this book around 2018. So it was after Trump was elected, after the Me Too movement had erupted in Los Angeles. And I saw my immediate community, who was primarily populated with like spiritual new age people, all of a sudden using extremely dehumanizing, divisive language that was very violent, a lot of bigotry, a lot of vitriol, kill all men, smash the patriarchy, those types of things. And it confused me to see people who I thought we were on the same page in terms of unifying humanity and creating a more peaceful world using such violent languaging. And so I started to question the dominant narrative that patriarchy was the reason for everything bad that had ever happened since the beginning of time. And that the proposed solution was to put women on top, or Black people on top, or gay, trans, giraffes on top, or like whatever it was. It just, and so I started to question the whole hierarchical construct, which alleges that for there to be winners in our culture, we need there to also be losers. And I'm like, if that's our organizational setup, then we need to evolve out of this. It is time for us to move beyond losers and winners and privileging and status into an organizational structure that allows everyone to win and thrive. And so I realized that the fundamental issue plaguing us was not patriarchy, it's hierarchy, right? So it doesn't matter if we put women on top. If those women are treating men poorly, and now we're expecting men to take short shrift, we're all losing, because we really truly are a singular species of humanity. So I spent a couple months doing all this nerdy research into like, Latin etymology and prefixes and suffixes to find the like just right replacement. I was really into synarchy, but synarchy was weaponized by the Nazi Party, by various like kind of fascist groups. So after a couple months of this inquiry, I realized like I've wandered way off track. Like this book just wants to be written. So I'm going to call it Betterarchy as a placeholder and teach us the tools to help us evolve out of hierarchy, because hierarchy is an abstraction. It's a construct. It's not like a thing built with bricks and mortar. And so hierarchy is empowered and kept alive by our language, by us using a language of division and privileging and status, by using a language that is encoded with the frequencies of lack, limitation, disempowerment, fear, conflict, etc., etc. So in this book, I delineate 10 markers of hierarchical languaging so that we can see and start to take responsibility for our world. And we can see where we are sustaining hierarchy with our language, and how we can make these very simple, easy shifts in our everyday languaging patterns that up-level the frequency of our words to what I'm calling betterarchy. So when we're speaking a language that is encoded with the frequencies of empowerment, of unity, of peace, of abundance, of sustainability, of equality, then the world that emerges from those words will reflect those same qualities. It can't not, because language is the fundamental building block of this reality construct.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. I agree with you. I believe language is at the heart of everything that we have, basically. But let's have a few examples then. So talk us through some examples of how the language of patriarchy and all that, how does that disempower? How is that unhelpful? And then give us examples of betterarchy, better language. Because I have actually, in advance of us chatting tonight, I have listened to some of your stuff, and it's really quite interesting. So I'm kind of on board with where you're coming from, but I want everybody listening to understand it as well, Dani. So just give us a few examples.
Sure. And I appreciate you taking the time to look into my work. So every word in our language, and this applies to every language, however, I'm only fluent in English, but every word in our language is encoded with a unique frequency. Think of it like a fingerprint or a snowflake. Every word has its own frequency. And the coding in those frequencies, they program us as people, right? Like when we're bandying words about, when I'm reading certain words, those words are programming me. Those words are also programming our collective reality construct, right? So I'll give you an example. When I say I don't have time, I say I don't have time. I'm alleging a scarcity of time. That statement is coded with the frequencies of lack, of not enoughness, of scarcity, right? So when I say I don't have time, I am putting the frequencies out into the world that say I am living in scarcity. I am living in lack. The way this reality construct works is whatever we program into what evolutionary biologists call the morphogenetic field, which is the singular field of energy that links us as human beings. Whatever we put into that by way of our thoughts, words, and actions, the most programming that it receives, right? Like say the majority of people are programming that field with fear, we're going to get a fearful reality. It gives us back exactly what we put into it.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So instead of saying, I don't have time, I would flip it to, I'm already scheduled. How about Wednesday, right? So therefore, I'm in choice. It's not that there's a lack of time. It's simply like a scheduling conflict, right? So that's like a tiny example. But these damaging hierarchical codes are infusing our everyday language because we've adopted the language of hierarchy, not realizing that this is a language that is dividing us, that is disempowering us, that is enslaving us. When I say I'm not allowed to fly without a vaccine passport, I've just dropped the ball on my own sovereign agency, and I've alleged that some external entity has power over me. I'm not allowed. Right? Versus the airline has a mandatory vaccine policy. I'm not aligned with that, so I choose not to fly. Now I'm still in a place of empowerment. I'm not giving my agency away to a stupid rule. You know, and I always go like this with my hands when I'm describing it. If I say I'm not allowed, then the matrix has power over me. When I say they have a rule, I'm not aligned with it, I maintain my sovereign agency. I'm not disempowered. I'm not victimized to tyranny.
Tell me this. So are you saying that words are frequency? Words are, because I've got to say, last year, back in 23, I went to an event hosted by a guy called David Icke. Dave, and do you know David? And
I interviewed David back in 2009, I believe.
Well, he's really interesting guy, and I was able to have a chat with him on the night and whatnot. And in fact, actually, the sponsors that we have for this show, Dani, are the people who sponsored David as well. But he was very interesting. The stuff he talked about, frequency and stuff. But what you're saying is really quite subtle and kind of aligned to that, because I get what you're saying. You know, what you're saying has frequency and it goes out there and it's going to come back at a boomerang into you one way or the other. So therefore, choosing the right language makes a difference, and being a victim or being an empowered person, I guess.
Exactly. You know, the difference between being a victim and being an empowered person has nothing to do with what happens to us. It only has to do with the stories we tell about it, how I choose to frame it. You know, an example that I often use, if someone says, like, he cheated on me, he abandoned me. In that framing, which is one of the clues of victim languaging, I'm front and center of his story, right? Victim languaging is very narcissistic. Everything is happening to us because we're the center, not only of our own worlds, but of everyone else's world. Did he cheat on me, or did he simply explore a connection with someone else and my feelings got hurt, right? In that instance, in that framing, I'm not a victim. I'm simply neutrally explaining what happened. Whether he broke an agreement or not, it's not like something happened to me. This thing happened, neutral reality. Here are my feelings about it. You know, so we have this, you know, we look at victim culture being one of the, you know, hugest, you know, that's the real pandemic that we're facing is victim culture and victim consciousness. And you look at it and it's all languaging. These things happened to me. He made me feel bad. He traumatized me. He triggered me. No one has that power to do anything when we're in touch with our sovereign agency and our empowerment. The problem with victim consciousness is that if everyone else is to blame for our sucky lot in life, then I'm not resourced to change my life or my world. Only when we take 100% responsibility for our experience of reality are we resourced to change our lives, to change the world for the better, which is why so much of the languaging coming out of the mainstream media and the whole propaganda landscape is meant to convince us that we have no agency, that we are disempowered. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you look at the whole woke thing, I mean, it's basically marred in victimhood. It's always somebody else's fault, never my fault. It's always someone else's fault. But then where does responsibility come, and when does, you know, basically owning the situation you're in? Because I think that's what you're saying. You have to own where you are and take control.
1,000%. And it's not to say that we don't get triggered. Of course, we all get triggered because this is an unfair realm. We all suffer. You know, there's no one has a stronghold on suffering just because of their skin color, their gender. Like, everyone suffers. And everyone has blessings. But it's only when we take responsibility for our triggers and choose to look within to see where we have healing to do, where we can integrate, then can we be empowered to live the lives that we dream of, make our world a better place, which is the last thing that the social engineers want us to do.
And going back to what you said earlier, would you say that the whole Me Too thing that came along in I mean, how would you summarize it? Because I think that's been incredibly toxic and unhelpful and has contributed nothing apart from, you know, causing lots of pain to people. What do you think about that?
It's so toxic, and it's so infantilizing and disempowering to women to assume that we can't have our own backs. There's never a question in those conversations as to, well, why did this young woman take a meeting in someone's hotel room at midnight? Like, like that never comes into play. No one asks, like, why are these women doing things that were an authentic no to them? And then they didn't say anything until 17 years later when the cameras were in the face, And I think it goes back, as a woman, I find it extremely offensive. I look at the Louis C.K. narrative, and I don't know him, so that's another thing. These are very one-sided conversations. But from what we've been told about Louis C.K., why didn't those women just get up and leave the room? If they were so uncomfortable with what was happening, why didn't they use their own sovereign agency to stand up, reach for the door, and leave? So there's no conversation about chasing fame, women selling themselves out for famous people, which was the whole point of Trump's grab. I don't know what your policies here are.
We're open, free speech.
That was my frustration about the whole out of context, grab them by the pussy. Yeah. When you look at that in its full context, Trump was not advocating for this as a way to treat women. He was not saying this is a fine way to treat women. He was saying when you're rich and famous, women will sell themselves down the river and allow you to mistreat them. And so why are we not talking about that? It's very frustrating to me. And it's frustrating that women don't see how disempowering the conversation is, that we're not capable of having our own backs.
Yeah, I get that, because the thing about it is that whole Me Too thing was sold as this is empowering women, and it was the exact opposite. It was disempowering, and it's it hasn't completely gone away. It still floats around. I think it's still a big factor, but it's the fact that so much in this, as I've grown older, the one thing I've learned is there's so much inversion going on. Me Too is not about empowerment. It's about disempowerment, which you've talked about already in this one, is about empowerment. But it's strange that not enough, I don't think enough women fully probably understand that. Certainly all the, those most prominent Me Too voices. I mean,
right.
What do you,
I think it's important to look at the most prominent Me Too voices are celebrities. They're people who are paid to pretend. And I'm so excited for the moment when we outgrow this worshiping of paid pretenders and conflating the fact that they might be good at pretending with being some sort of thought leaders or cultural leaders. I take the same issue with the phrase women-owned business. And anytime someone says that to me, I'm like, do not ghettoize my gender. We don't need you to buy our goods and services because you feel sorry for us, because you think we're pathetic. Like, since I was born in the 70s, women have owned businesses. It's not really that big of a deal. But this phrase that makes it seem like a big deal and that people should engage our goods and services out of pity, that is disempowering and disgusting and moving us way backwards.
But don't you think so much of what we've seen in recent years has been actually moving women back, whilst in the guise of we're making great progress, and like, for example, I saw it was the Golden Globes. I think the Golden Globes took place somewhere in the US in the last day or so, and I was looking at the jury, and apparently the jury for the Golden Globes, they changed it, didn't they? So that it's now 47% female, right? And 23% ethnic, other types of ethnicities and stuff. And I'm thinking, even though Golden Globes is about people pretending to be things, even though that's what it is, even that, they're tinkering with everything and actually devaluing. They don't say it, but they're devaluing their own very profession. But that's how they are. They don't get it, Dani.
No, they don't get it. And it's so frustrating to watch the movement backwards. Same with, the race relations conversation,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
seemed to erupt in this big nightmare as soon as Obama was elected. And it's like, wow, that's interesting. As soon as we have our first Black president here, we're also told that race relations have devolved to the point that we need Black Lives Matter and we need reparations and all this crazy stuff.
But yeah, but can I ask just on that, on you talk about language and words, Black Lives Matter. I mean, that was a very cultivated expression, but a very well, I've got lots of problems with it. What's your take on it?
I also have lots of problems with it. So when Black Lives Matter emerged onto the scene at the end of 2013, 2014, I was
Yeah,
still allowed to play in mainstream journalism a little bit, which I'm not anymore.
yeah.
And at the time, I was writing for an online publication called Reality Sandwich. And I pitched them. I said, hey, I would like to write an article about the divisive language coding in Black Lives Matter
Mhm.
and just explain to people how the name of this movement will absolutely create more racism and division.
Yeah.
And I was fired. And my editor said, well, Dani, as a white man, I have to lean into my own self-preservation and we can't let you do this. And look what happened. Because when we say, let's take something extremely neutral. When I say butterflies matter, the way the subconscious mind works, it's like, why does she have to say that? Who thinks that butterflies don't matter? And
Yeah.
why does she feel the need to defend something that I had never questioned? So it brings into question something that shouldn't even be questioned. Of course, Black Lives Matter, just saying it
Yes.
in itself
Yeah.
is inserting the opposition into the larger conversation.
Oh, get that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because then if people try to respond to that by saying, I mean, a lot of us said, well, surely all lives matter. So we can't be, you can't just select one particular life because all life, I think all civilized people believe all lives have equal merit on this world, but somehow, no, it was Black Lives Matter that stuck. And if you dissented from that, it's difficult because if you dissent from that, Dani, then that makes you a racist and all kinds of awful things, But it's the programming which is getting into your territory. It's very cunning programming.
Exactly, because it doesn't actually, like you and I both know, it doesn't make you a racist. But the way that word has been completely weaponized and is now being bandied about so recklessly without any real conscious thought about how damaging that is and what the coding in that word really does to a person's life. And how, I remember when Trump was elected and people were talking about hate speech.
Yep.
And I would say to those people, the way you're talking about Trump and the people who voted for him, that is hate speech.
Is hate speech. Yep. And you're absolutely right. Yeah. The whole sort of tone of discussions and the words that are used, so impactful, Dani. But the Black Lives Matter thing, I thought, was a good example of this insertion in the programming and making it difficult. But then the other thing, again, you touched on there, so many words have become weaponized to the point, calling people racist, bigoted, a Nazi. I think those words, those are still not nice words, but I think they've lost a hell of a lot of any kind of impact that they ever once had. What do you think about that?
They have absolutely lost their impact, which I think is lending itself to a more dangerous culture, because I do believe real racism exists, not to the extent or in the same ways that it's being alleged.
Yeah.
But now we don't have a real word to describe that. And because that word has become so weaponized and watered down, that when it's actually appropriate, it doesn't mean anything. Same with rapist, sexual predator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those don't mean anything anymore. The word privilege has become ridiculous.
Yep.
I teach homeschool students about propaganda, and I have 13-year-old boys apologizing for their privilege. And I'm just like, please don't ever, do not ever do that. again, we all suffer, we all have blessings. I don't know how they're doled out, but we all get a mix. So yeah, it's frustrating. And it's also frustrating to see people who are pushing against consensus narratives embracing this type of language. You know, people, when we identify as anti-vaxxers, climate change deniers, flat earthers,
Yeah.
that's damaging too, because we're using their dehumanizing language that is meant to put us in homogenized cages, as though we all think the same. You know, you call someone an anti-vaxxer, then the associations are, well, then they're like an alt-right MAGA Nazi QAnon conspiracy theorist. You know,
absolutely right.
For this insanity.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point, isn't it? And that does show the power of language, because and I think it is important, where possible, that we choose our vocabulary, the words that we want to use, not the words that are cast upon us. Because I have no doubt that words like anti-vaxxers, for example, these have been cleverly scripted words coming out of all kinds of sort of high places, because they know that it triggers things. The worst thing in the world, although I have to say, Dani, to be honest, back in 2020, I started this whole last couple of years by saying, listen, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've taken vaccines for different things. I'm very, but not this particular one at this point in the game. That's how I started. I'll be honest with you, Dani. You see, after a couple of years of their relentless anti-vaxxer, I said, yeah, I'm an anti-vaxxer. I'm 100% an anti-vaxxer. I would never touch one again. Only my personal opinion. Everyone has to have their own choices. But I do take your point, though. If you play back their words, you legitimize their language, and that's not a good thing, I think.
Exactly. And it's doing damage on multiple levels. So I'm happy that we're talking about this, because, like, I don't eat sugar. Am I anti-sugar? Do I think sugar shouldn't exist? No, I honor everyone's free will.
Yep.
So it's just not a choice that I make for myself.
Yep.
By embracing the phrase anti-vaxxer, we're normalizing these vaccines. Right now, we're the weirdos because we're the antis and they're the normal ones.
Right.
And normalization is the very last phase of any sort of tyrannical takeover. It also alleges that I have active oppositional energy or thoughts that I am directing out. I'm a very loving, peaceful person. I am truly not anti anything. Yeah. Anyone can do whatever they want. Just because I'm not in favor of gender reassignment surgery for children, I'm not anti-trans. I don't have enough care or attention units to direct towards that movement to create an oppositional position. And that's that narcissism that thinks, because, I'm not posting the Ukraine flag, I'm no, I just don't care. It's not even on my radar. I'm not interested in that psyop. So when we embrace these anti prefixes, not only are we normalizing what the mainstream is doing, but we're taking on this oppositional stance that very often we don't actually have. We might be neutral.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah. But I mean, another example of that is, again, the way of construction of words, climate change denier. You're a climate change denier.
It's so clunky. Even coming out of the mouth, it's the stupidest phrase in the world. Climate change denier. It's like, no, because that just legitimizes and normalizes the climate change narrative. So it's like they create a construct.
Yeah.
And then when we choose anti, we're legitimizing the construct and we're just staying within the construct versus pulling ourselves out of the construct entirely and saying, I'm not an anti anything. I simply don't acknowledge that narrative.
Which is an absolutely key point, I think. Yeah, that is actually the route out of all of this, I think, because if you engage on their terms, on their linguistical terms, I think it becomes difficult then, because in a way, Dani, you've walked into their language traps.
Exactly.
As you say, if you take the approach that you're sort of advocating, then you're not acknowledging their concept in the first place, basically, which is ideal, really. But it's very difficult because they come at us all the time with so many of these different language traps. Climate change denier. And the problem is that you talked about celebrity earlier. I happen to be looking through somebody's a particular well-known person's Twitter X profile, and I was counting all the different flags they had, and they had the rainbow flag, they had the Ukraine flag, they had the One Love flag, and I'm thinking to myself, how much narcissism have you got? I can't believe that. I don't need to have any flags.
Well, the frustrating thing about those flags is most of the people who are posting those flags don't know anything about what's going on in those countries. They don't understand that Ukraine is Khazaria, and that's, goes back to the Rothschilds. They don't understand what's happening there with, the neo-Nazis and whatnot. It's just the hip thing to do. And the last, just going back to the ER thing, because this is what I'm really fired up about these days, is that tacking the ER onto beliefs, disbeliefs, voting habits, you see with Trumper, is a way of dehumanizing us, right?
Yeah.
A person who voted for Trump is still a person who maintains their humanity, who is deserving of compassion and respect. A Trumper, the humanity has been removed. That's what that ER does. That's how it programs the mind. It removes the humanity. So now I don't have to be kind to that person because they're not a person. They're a Trumper, which is why, regardless of my allegiances, I refuse to identify with any of those. And I always call them out if people bring them to me. I was hanging out with a friend and he was demonizing Trumpers. And I just said, what is a Trumper? And he said, MAGA white supremacists. And I said, you know what? As someone who's attuned to languaging, that is like a knife through my heart. That's so dehumanizing. Just because you don't understand your fellow humans' choices, you're demonizing them. And he got it. That actually landed because I didn't argue politics for him. I wasn't telling him why Trump was, good or bad or anything. Yeah. I was simply speaking to the dangers of the languaging and snapped him out of it.
Although it's interesting, I remember back in 2015, I think it was, I remember Hillary Clinton asserting that people who did support Trump were deplorables. Now, you talk about demonizing millions of people. And do you think she knew what she was doing when she used a term like that? Because they weren't deplorables. As you say, they were individual human beings on a spectrum. Some maybe loved Trump, some were just okay with him, whatever. But when a basket of deplorables, that's pretty strong words.
I think it was very deliberate because when you look into who funds not just these media outlets that are doing the dehumanizing, but also the fact-checking institutes and Wikipedia and all of that, the Clinton Foundation is always going to be there. And she's been in the game long enough. I think it's very deliberate. I live in New Mexico. Our governor calls Trump supporters lizard people. She actually says this on camera without shame. And I'll track on Twitter my local representatives and I won't weigh in on their policies, right? I stay neutral. I'm just hey, elected leaders, how about acting with some dignity? How about speaking only about policies and respecting all of your constituents, whether you agree with them or not? Can we raise the frequency of these conversations and have them in a way that maintains respect?
Yeah. And I think this is what's so important about the work that you're doing, actually, Dani. It is about that raising the frequency. It is about not allowing ourselves to descend into the very sort of lowest circle of hell in terms of language. Because if we raise language, the level of language, the frequency, things become better. This is the whole point, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that was, my very first application of this work when I started exploring the frequencies in language back in 2007 was all about my own personal development and me rooting out, the own tendencies in my language towards scarcity or towards victim mentality or towards feeling sorry for myself or whatever it was. And I started to clue in that like all of the unhappiness and misery and obstacles that I was experiencing, I was creating by the way that I was choosing to tell my own stories and frame my stories. And so all of this is from my own personal experience. You know, my new book moves it into the realm of societal overhaul and evolution, but it has changed my life. And as someone who's, you know, tons of therapy and life coaches in this modality and this plant medicine and this, nothing has had the impact on my life that changing my language has.
And is that because that's coming from the inside out, isn't it? Obviously, you're thinking through, you're considering before you start talking, basically, the words that you're choosing to use. And if you choose the right words, then you're feeling better. You know, life becomes easier, better. Conversations are more fulfilling. And presumably, Dani, you don't. If you do what you recommend, then you don't get the hostility back as much, maybe as you might if you just sort of if you don't do what you suggest.
Exactly. And that's, you know, that's a really great point is, you know, we were talking earlier about those pauses we take, you know, to sidestep the censorship machine. Same with the pauses that I take before I decide how am I going to frame what I'm about to say to this person in front of me that's going to seed us with peace or keep the vibration high. An example that I often use, you know, to take it away from something as polarizing as politics, like I had a cast on my hand for you know, a good portion of 2021. And what I noticed is when people asked what was going on with my hand, if I said something that was scary, you know, they would look at me with pity. They would give me the like, "Aw," and then I would internalize that and I would feel worse. If people would ask me what's happening with my hand and I would say, "I'm integrating a cosmic upgrade," they would laugh, they would smile, I would feel good, and we would just move on to another topic.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting also because I can remember back in the day, Dani, I used to go into all the mainstream TV outlets and stuff before I was finally banished from them. And I remember even then, I can remember going in and there was a lot of conflict and confrontation because it was on political topics mostly, right? And I would have held a particular set of views. And I remember at one point I realized that the worst thing I can do is engage in this same language as these people, because I get cross, I don't be happy, I come out of there absolutely raging. So I then started to try to kind of be relaxed in myself and not wanting to go. Instinct would tell you confront it but that's wrong. That's exactly what you shouldn't do. Again, it's this inversion. Do the opposite. And you can I remember some very successful conversations on media where I just relaxed into my own language skills, and that was just better. I felt better at coming out of it. You know, I have a smile on my face rather than wanting to punch somebody when I finished. So there's a definite truth to what you're saying, that words matter.
They absolutely matter. And, you know, to hop on to what you're saying, hierarchy, as I said earlier, it's win-lose, right? Hierarchy operates under the illusion of a scarcity of resources that we have to compete with one another to attain to survive. Betterarchy acknowledges there's enough to go around. We can work together. So one of the principles, you know, moving from hierarchy to betterarchy is in your conversations, are you trying to prove that you're right? Are you trying to win? Or are you seeking to foster understanding between the two of you, right? So I know why I believe what I believe. And as a journalist, like I'm very clear on the facts. So when someone comes to me with a belief or an allegation that differs from my own, instead of doubling down on what I know, I open it up and say, tell me more. Tell me why you think that. I want to understand your thought process. And then the other person feels safe. They're not put on the defensive, like I'm going to attack them. And then it helps me understand more why they've come to believe what they believe. And I don't need to make them wrong. You know, great. Everyone has the God-given right to believe what they want to believe. That doesn't have to be a deal breaker for us to work together, be kind to one another.
Oh, I agree. I can think of very few occasions where you can demonstrably prove and get someone to accept the fact that they've got it completely wrong. Human beings don't respond in that way. You know, we will all go on the defensive and will not be happy. But if you have a conversation, and this is, I mean, I've been doing this now for quite a while, and I figure if I throw out ideas, that's going to be far better than making categorical statements about things. So people can latch on to and think about ideas and come to maybe very different conclusions than me, but that doesn't matter. But you get it's a better engagement, Dani. It's a much better engagement rather than sort of hectoring someone into saying, you better believe what I think, because that doesn't work. And yet, so much of what we see in our lives, you know, day to day, the whole sort of sphere of news and politics, it is driven actually by that. My idea is better than your idea, and you better come on to what I'm saying. And I don't think it works.
I don't think it works at all. And it's, you know, it's why as we're moving into the season of the presidential election that we may or may not have, and at this point it seems so silly given what happened the last time.
Yeah,
but,
no need for it.
You know, the presidential debates are so ridiculous and out of date. It's like, let me show the public how I can cling to my idea and fight to the death why my idea is right, instead of indicating that I can actively listen to a different perspective, find the Venn diagram of crossover, and find my way diplomatically to win-win solutions that serve everyone. So a big, you know, one of the foundations of the language of betterarchy is starting to differentiate between masculine, feminine polarities in language, right? Having nothing to do with embodied men and women, but going back to like the Hermetic principle of gender, understanding the qualities of these two polarities that animate third dimensional reality, and starting to see when, you know, if I'm trying to win an argument, that's the masculine. If I'm seeking to create space for different ideas and understand, now I'm bringing in the feminine, right? And so a lot, you know, this ridiculous notion that like putting women on top is going to fix our world. Not if the women are leading with masculine, not if the women are still shaming and blaming and dividing. That's not going to help anything. That's useless, pointless optics, right? When we attune to how our language is harming us or can help us, now we're resources starting to use language in a way that serves the greatest good of all.
Well, you see, you're dead right in what you're saying about just replacing men at the top by women at the top. And we see instance time after time. There's a very big story happening in the UK at the moment where the lady who was running the post office here in the UK, she did a terrible job, absolutely abysmal job, and it's caused a huge, you know, furore. But I believe that's because she was the boss. She was the boss, and so she therefore no better than her male predecessor. She didn't add anything at all. Arguably, maybe even worse. You know, so that's why, as you say, just to replace one with the other, it's stupid. Doesn't work. Doesn't add anything.
It doesn't add anything because patriarchy, like hierarchy, is a lens of perception. And all of us in the West, we have been indoctrinated with this lens of perception. So exactly like you said earlier, it's an inside job for me to look at where am I dividing and shaming and blaming and creating separation, and where can I make those shifts myself. And the more of us who do that, the quicker we'll see the positive change on our planet.
Do you think it's different in the East as opposed to the West? You know, so Western sort of culture is as you've just described it. Do you think Eastern culture is different?
Well, I'm certainly not the expert, but I have spent a lot of time in India. And in India, I see a reverence for the unseen that is mocked here in the West, right? This is a very materialist, rationalist culture, right? So it's very left-brained. Whereas, you know, here in the States, we demonize anything right-brained, intuition, emotion, mysticism. You know, all of those things are totally demonized. In India, those things are revered. So my guess is that it lends itself to more balanced perspective and way of making meaning of the world.
I agree. I agree. I completely agree with you. I think that's one of, I mean, I do worry about the state of Western culture, society. I mean, sometimes I feel like we are in the last days of Rome, so to speak. But when I look towards Eastern culture, I don't see that. And I think, what is it that's gone so badly wrong with us over the last 50 years, whatever? And you sort of think, how has our society nosedived into this kind of narcissistic sort of infighting that achieves nothing? Meanwhile, that everything is going down the toilet. And you look to India. You mentioned India. I've got lots of friends in India, Indians friends as well, and I do see a disparity there, and I envy sort of the way they operate in their societies. When I see the West patronize them, that really gets me, because I'm thinking, hang on a second, they're going to survive. We mightn't. And we need to think about the values and the things that we do and the things we place, Dani, priority on versus what they place a priority on. I think we're the people who have a lot to learn.
I agree. I think it points back to like a long demoralization play that the social engineers have pulled on us here.
Yeah.
The first time I was in India, 1999 to 2000, I noticed that, the people who I was spending time with had, there was a family, they would eat one meal a day of just rice.
Yeah.
And they were so happy. And what I noticed in my time in India, they didn't have depression. They didn't have anxiety. There wasn't all this mental, ADHD and triggered and it's like the pronoun conversation, like none of that is happening in parts of the world where they're just trying to get enough to eat and enough to drink. So I think it's, we have a very skewed understanding of the world. I think we've become addicted to comfort here. We become, I saw it during the lockdowns where like my friends who knew better but wanted to travel would put a mask on and go through the shenanigans. And I was like, but you know better. Oh, but I want to do what I want to do. But I want to go to Hawaii. And it's like, everyone just wants to do that they want to do. No one's willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit in service to the greater good. I do think we've taken our individualism here to kind of a crazy extreme. Where
Yes, it's a very fair point. The number one reason for most people, certainly here in the UK, taking, for example, the COVID vaccines was they wanted to travel. That was the number one reason. It wasn't, they thought it's going to help protect me. No. They want to travel. But that's kind of damning, I think, on us as a society.
1,000%. And this is, what I've been saying for a while now is like, we're doing this to ourselves because we haven't said no. If everyone who knew better just said, no, I'm not willing to wear a mask while traveling because this is wrong, it would be done. It would be done. But everyone just wants to do what they want to do and aren't considering the greater good, how high the stakes are. And that's where I get frustrated at my own people for their addiction to their comfort or their, like whatever it was that had them compromising their integrity to just play along.
But then back to the wordsmiths again. The wordsmiths were using really clever phrases during those couple of years, such as think of Granny. Don't take the vaccine just for yourself. Take it for somebody else. And I'm thinking, well, it's subtle. I get the psychology and I get the phraseology, and it kind of worked. I mean, that's why, Dani, that's why I wanted to have you on, because we have to be empowered to understand the words that are coming our way and how we can best deal with them and how we can then respond in optimum fashion, which I think is what Betterarchy is about. It's about trying to get to a better place in terms of language.
Yes, it is 100%. And the reason that I wrote it and I'm so proud of it is because it's an actual tool that you and me and all of us could start using right now to make immediate change. And I think sometimes, the challenges that we're facing as humanity can seem so overwhelming. And I get it that people will just like tap out and be like, I can't handle it. I'll just, get stoned and watch Netflix because it's too scary what's going on. And who am I? I'm just one little person.
Yep.
And what I want people to understand is how much power we really do have as individuals. And if they had any power at all, they wouldn't have to lie. They wouldn't have to coerce. They wouldn't have to co-opt the media and propagandize all of us if they truly had an honest leg to stand on. And so, my prayer for you and me, for anyone listening, is that we realize how much power we have and we start using that to say no and steer humanity into a different direction immediately.
Well, that's a very positive way to end everything on. So listen, before we go, can we just bring up Dani's book again, The Language of Betterarchy? There you go. If you want to check it out, you can go over to davidvance.net and you'll find it over there. And you can find it also, obviously, online as well in other places. So Dani, and in fact, Dani has other books as well. They're Word Up as well. So I was watching your Odyssey reel on Word Up. I was watching that as well, Dani. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk to my viewers who are all around the world. And, I hope I found that interesting, and I would certainly recommend Dani's book. And I think, Dani, this is what we need. We need fresh thinking. We need new ways, new tools, and, ways in which we can become happier people, more effective people, withstand propaganda better as well, all those things. And it all lies in language and what we use. So Dani, thank you very much. That's it from Dani and myself for tonight, folks. We'll be back on Wednesday night, so join me then. Until then, it's good night.